In Chapter 21 of the Smart Sales System, we focus on dealing with and getting around sales objections. And if you were only going to read one chapter in the Smart Sales System, I would pick this chapter because basically objections are what the prospect uses to try to get rid of you, to try to slow or end conversations. And so if you can simply improve your ability to deal with those situations, you can drastically improve your ability to get into conversations, to start conversations, to keep conversations going, and to get into new accounts. And some examples of objections could be, I don't have time for this right now. What is this in regards to? Is this a sales call? I'm not interested. We don't have any budget or money right now. We already used someone for that. We're not looking at making any changes right now. Just send me your information. Call me back in 6 months. Those should look familiar if you've done any amount of prospecting. And I view those objections right there as very common objections that you will face regardless of what you sell. Now, you could add to that list about 3 to 5 objections that are specific to your product, service, or the industry you operate in, such as it's too difficult to make a change to your service, your price is too high, your product is too complex and difficult to use. Stuff like that, which is specific to your product, you could add to this. Now, while you look at that list, and sure, these can be pretty difficult objections to deal with, but the good thing is that this is a fairly short list. And what that means is that it's fairly reasonable for you to become familiar with these objections and have a good idea of how to respond so that when you're prospecting and you face those objections again and again, you can know what to do in those situations. Which not only can this improve your ability to establish conversations, get conversations going, get into new accounts, generate leads, and sell more, but being able to improve your competency in this area will actually make your job a lot easier. You will feel less anxiety, you will deal with less rejection and less resistance, and your job will just be easier, and in some ways selling will become more fun. One metaphor or analogy to think about is, think about a quarterback on a football team. If that quarterback knows the defensive plays that they need to prepare for and can visually know what's coming their way, they can avoid getting hit and put the ball where they need to. So not only are they avoiding physical pain, but they're actually performing better and and it's a lot more fun to win than lose. By becoming more knowledgeable in this area, you can go from getting beat up and not having any fun and not winning or selling to your job being easier and being in more control and having more fun. Today, we're going to go through each of these objections, and I'm going to give you a response and way to handle each of these. So if you're looking at this list saying, I don't know what to do in those situations, don't worry. The Smart Sales System is going to tell you exactly what to do. So the agenda for today is, before we get to the objection responses, I want to talk about core concepts that you need to keep in mind that will help you with how you think about and handle objections. I want to talk about 3 different objection handling options, and then I'm just going to go through all of those objections one by one and actually give you responses and give you the logic for how to respond. And you can either just copy those objection responses exactly, use them exactly as is, or get ideas from them. So to start out with, let's dig into some core concepts. The first thing I want you to keep in mind is that the goal when you face an objection, most of the time, is just to keep the conversation going. Let me give you an example. So a lot of times, let's say you hear the objection of, I'm not interested. Your natural instinct will be to try to make that person interested because they're saying, I'm not interested in your product. You're likely very proud of your product. You think it's great. You think they should be interested, and also you'll get paid if they're interested and they buy your product. So your first and natural instinct is to try to say something to make them interested. So they say, I'm not interested. Oh, but I didn't tell you about this. Do you know about that? Are you sure you don't like that? I want you to pause on that natural instinct because I'm going to explain to you in a minute. Your main goal is just to keep the conversation going. Sure, there are moments where you want to deal with the objection head on, but the majority of the time, the fact that they're not interested is not really that important. I'm going to explain that why in a couple slides. But what I want you to start to think about is that the goal is just to keep the conversation going. It's not to try to get resolve or get around the objection most of the time. As with the other chapters in the Smart Sales System, we want to take a step back and try to understand the prospect. And regarding objections, let's try to understand why the prospect is giving us objections and why we face these when we're trying to sell. Well, the first thing is that likely when a prospect says an objection, they're trying to get rid of you. And it could simply be because you're calling them, you're talking to them, and you're an interruption from something they're trying to do. And one reason why they might begin to sense that you're an interruption is because you're doing something that makes you sound like you're a salesperson trying to sell something. They're busy. They don't want to deal with a salesperson that's trying to sell something. That they might also find that kind of annoying. Their guardedness starts to increase and they use an objection to get rid of you. They also might not want to be sold to. So just the act of someone trying to talk somebody into something can become annoying or uncomfortable that some people want to avoid, and they will give you an objection to try to avoid that situation. For example, have you ever gone to a store where you needed to buy something, you had money to buy it, and you were actually looking for something, and maybe you couldn't even find it, and a salesperson walks up to you and says, "Is there something I can help you with?" And have you ever said, "No, I'm fine," and you let them go away, even knowing you do actually need help finding it, but you decide to try to find it on your own? If you've ever been in that situation, the reason why someone might do that is because sometimes it's a little uncomfortable and annoying just to deal with someone trying to get in our business and try to talk to us and ask us questions and try to maybe push something on us that we don't really want. So if you sound like a salesperson trying to sell something and they start to get uncomfortable and they don't want to be sold to, they might start to use an objection to try to get rid of you. They also might genuinely think that they do not need what you sell. As you know, there are many situations where you talk to a prospect and they give you an objection or say they don't need it, they don't want it, but you know they really do and you know that they could benefit from it. Well, even knowing you're probably right and they're wrong, that they actually do need it, the reason why they're giving you an objection is because they may genuinely think, "I'm not interested and I don't need it." It's not to say you can't sell them. It's not to say that you can't help them to understand why they need it or make them interested in buying from you. But it's just important to understand that the reason why they're giving you the objection is because they might just genuinely think that they don't need what you sell. And they also might not be in buying mode at that particular time for what you sell. So maybe there is something they buy from time to time that you provide, but at the exact time that you reach out to them, they're not looking for it right then, and they might feel like you're a salesperson trying to sell to them at that particular moment. Since they're not in buying mode, they give you an objection to try to get rid of you. So now while we can look at those and say, well, yeah, okay, that's all understandable, that's not really revolutionary, conclusions to reach. The reason why I go through all of that is because if those are some of the main or good reasons why a prospect tries to get rid of you, well, we can use that to try to modify your approach so that either you trigger less of these feelings to A, trigger less objections altogether, or B, when you are facing objections, you can keep these in mind with how you deal with the prospect and respond to them so that you can either make these go away or don't make them even worse. If we take some of that into consideration, as I've said before, it's really critical that you do not sound like a salesperson trying to sell something. This one tip alone impacts many of those things that I just outlined, right? So if you reach out to someone and you sound like a product-pushing salesperson who's going to try to talk someone into buying what they're selling, that's going to trigger guardedness, make them annoyed, make them give objections just to try to get away from you. Try to avoid that. And I'm not saying that you need to lie or manipulate the situation or mislead anybody, because the reality is you are a salesperson trying to sell something, but you can change what you say and how you operate to appear more like a consultant, more like an advisor, more like a business person. And you could even present yourself as a business person that may represent a company or a product that you ultimately might want to talk to them about it, which would be you trying to sell something. That's different or better than someone who is, this is what I sell, this is who I work for, I'm contacting you to try to talk to you about what I sell. That's a different sales message. That's the product selling message, which we've talked about before. We've also talked before about Don't sell the product, sell the meeting. And I mentioned before that there's a sales process with 3 main steps that you should be kind of using and going through with almost all prospects, which is there's the initial contact. This is the cold call, cold email, cold walk. Could be meeting someone at a networking event. Then the next step is the meeting. This is the appointment. Could just simply be having a conversation. And from there is a presentation of what you have to offer and how you can help. Most of the time when you face objections, it's going to be in the first 2 steps of the sales process. You typically will handle those in different ways. At the initial contact is when you want to go with the core concept of just trying to keep the conversation going and not really deal with the objection head on, because your goal at the initial contact is not to sell the product, it's to get to the meeting. So the really neat thing about all of this concept in particular, is that the majority of the objections that I showed you earlier actually become totally invalid when you fully embrace this concept. So let me show you. If you're at the initial contact and your goal is to get to the meeting, you're not selling the product, you're selling the meeting, then the fact that the prospect is not interested in buying your product is not a valid objection to stop. It's a valid objection for them not to buy what you sell today, but you're not selling the product today, you're selling the meeting. The fact that the prospect does not have budget to spend or is already using someone today is not a valid reason to not keep talking. Those are all really good reasons to not buy your product. If the prospect doesn't have money, then and you're trying to sell the product, you're in product selling mode, then that's a very good reason for them to stop talking to you and you to walk away. But if your goal is just to start the conversation, then that's actually totally invalid. And so if you fully embrace that, that can change your mentality and it can impact what you say when you respond to objections. So the objection responses I'm going to show you in a bit totally take all of that into account, and you can actually explain that to the prospect by telling them you're not trying to sell anything, you're just trying to start the conversation. I'll show you what that looks like. We talked about how the prospect is guarded. They think you're trying to sell something and they think they don't need it or they're not in buying mode. So this is why all those objections are coming up. Well, what you could certainly do with your objection responses is disarm that guardedness and educate the prospect with something like this. Hey, Tom, I understand, and let's say Tom says, we're not looking to make any changes right now. Hey, Tom, listen, I understand, and to be honest with you, I want you to know I'm actually not reaching out to you to try to sign you up today or sell you anything or try to get you to switch. More so, we're just looking to open the dialogue between our 2 companies and have an initial conversation. I don't even know if you're a good fit with what we provide or not. So those are 3 different sentences. You can mix and match, or you take from that what you want. I put in brackets what each sentence is. So the first sentence is the education to them that you're not selling anything. Because remember, you're selling the meeting. And then the next sentence is you kind of educating the prospect on the process you're trying to take them through. You're just trying to start the conversation. And then the last sentence is a takeaway. So you're taking it away. Hey, I don't even know if you're a good fit. And that can also help to disarm them. So you can take these 3 sentences and put them in front of your objection responses that I'm going to show you later in the presentation. Now let's talk about 3 different options you have for how to handle an objection in particular. So option number 1 is you can comply with the objection. So what this looks like is prospect says, I'm busy right now. Okay, sorry to bother you. Prospect says, I'm not interested. Okay, have a great day. Complying is basically going along with the objection, giving in, accepting the objection. Option 2 is to overcome the objection. So this is, if someone says, I'm not interested, you might say something like, oh, well, but we typically increase sales by 30%. Are you saying that you don't need to increase sales or aren't interested in an increase by 30%? So what that is that's me trying to overcome the objection. Their mindset is, I'm not interested. I'm giving them more information to try to make them interested. The third option is to deflect the objections. Example for this might be if you can think back to the Karate Kid with the wax on and the wax off to block the karate kicks and karate hits. And so that's what this is like. So you're still getting hit a little bit, but you're trying to deflect and block away the objection so that you don't take a direct hit and that you're not trying to hit back, but you're trying to deflect so that you can keep the conversation moving forward. So let me give you an example. So if the prospect says, you know what, I'm not interested. Hey, listen, I understand, but if I could ask you real quick, are you guys using any type of formal sales methodology today, specifically in the area of handling objections? So what I just did there is I didn't try to make them interested. I deflected to a question. And the logic there is that the question doesn't make them interested. The question hopefully gets away from the objection. When they answer the question, I can then either ask another question, I can go somewhere else in my cold call script based on their answer. I have a lot of different options. I'm also gathering information. So instead of them getting rid of me, when they answer my question, I'm getting more information from them. So I'm totally turning the situation around 180 degrees from getting shot down to getting information and keeping the call going. The other thing is that most likely if you face an objection and you deflect with a question, then most likely the prospect will not go back to the objection. For example, if the prospect says, I'm not interested, and I say, I understand, do you mind if I ask if you're using a methodology? It's very unlikely that the prospect is going to just say, listen, I told you, I said I'm not interested. That is if you respond, if you're using more of a consultative selling approach where you're asking good questions and you aren't giving off that I'm a product pushing, product selling salesperson. It's when you give off that product pushing impression that you start to face more rejection, more resistance, more difficulty from the prospect. Deflecting with a question, most likely it's going to lead to some sort of answer. It could be a I don't know, it could be a yes, but we're fine, or it might not lead to a great answer, but most likely the objection is not going to be the response or answer to your question. Now, the key to deflecting is knowing what questions to ask or what to say in order to deflect, and I'll show you what all that looks like later in this presentation. So here are those three different options for handling objections, and the reality is that you should use all three of these different options at different times. To comply, at some point you do need to comply with objections. You just don't want to comply first or comply very quickly or easily. You want to try something else, and at some point you might need to give in and accept the objection. A good rule of thumb is if you face an objection, try to get around it 2 or 3 times with a different response, and then you can start to try to maybe comply. And it's not to say it'll completely walk away when you comply, but you might accept and go along with that objection. Now, to overcome, you primarily want to try to only overcome when you're at the meeting step or the presentation step. When you're trying to overcome, there's 2 things involved. One is you need some time and attention in order to build your case. So if you're trying to change someone's mind, that can be a difficult thing to do. And if you're at the initial contact step, you want to try to avoid overcoming because you don't have the time and attention at that step. It's only going to be a quick conversation. And you also don't really need to overcome the objection at the initial contact because you're just trying to progress to the meeting. Now, when you're at the meeting step, if your prospect has an objection and it might be a valid concern, you don't want to just deflect it and ignore it. You want to learn more about it and maybe see if it is a real issue. And the meeting is a good step to do that. The presentation is a good step to do that. Now with deflecting is what you should do primarily at the initial contact step only. And you don't really necessarily want to deflect too much at the meeting step because if your prospect has a valid concern, you don't want to just ignore it and try to keep the conversation going. You need to really understand their concerns and see if they're legitimate or showstoppers or something that you can resolve. That being the case, let's dig into actual responses for some of the most common objections that you're going to run into. What I'm going to talk mostly about is deflecting objections. And so in order to deflect objections, as I demonstrated earlier, was basically deflecting with a question. The key is knowing what questions to ask or what to say in order to deflect. In order to do that, we can actually use the consultative selling sales message. So I want to actually use a real message when I show you these objection responses instead of just using placeholder type of answers. So I'm going to go through real quick showing you a message for a particular product. I'm going to use web design services that hopefully just about everybody knows what a website is and that there's companies out there that build websites. And so I'm going to pretend that I'm a website design salesperson. And what we do is we build websites, graphic design, change websites. And so if I go through the consultative selling process to build a sales message for this product, the next step is to identify the value. So some of the value of this service that I'm trying to sell is I improve website design, traffic, conversion rates, improve SEO, generate more leads, generate more revenue. I can take those value points and look at what problems those help to solve. So those benefits help to improve websites that aren't performing, websites aren't converting, low website traffic, not getting leads, not getting SEO traffic and whatnot. Then I can go to the next step and think about what questions to ask to see if someone has those pain points. So how do you feel about your website? How important is it for conversion rates? How much of a priority is it for more traffic, and so on? So when I go through all those steps, I basically create a building block for product, value, pain, and pain questions. And that kind of takes us here. We can use these three building blocks, just value, pain, and pain questions, to create responses for many of the different objections. I'm going to show you what that looks like. I'm not including the product building block because the product building block is what you would primarily use. You'd primarily talk about your product when you're trying to overcome an objection, right? So a prospect says, I'm not interested. Well, what you're going to say to try to make them interested is talk more about your product. So when talking about deflecting, there's not a lot of times to use your product building block. So I'm going to replace that with a building block where we are educating more about the sales process and steps that we're trying to take them through. So these four building blocks here is what I'll use to provide you with almost 20 different objection responses. So going through the first one, I'm busy right now. I can deflect to the sales process, which is, oh, okay, I can be very brief, or I can call you back at another time. Which do you prefer? Or, okay, when is the best time for me to give you a call back? Many times when you let them know that you're going to call them back and that they're not going to get rid of you, they're just delaying the inevitable. If they're not genuinely too busy to give you a couple minutes, sometimes they might just ask you another question like, well, what is it in regards to, or what are you calling about? And when they give you that other question, you've gotten around this objection. So letting them know that you're going to call them back can kind of force their hand to give you at least another minute or two on this particular phone call. I just mentioned they might respond to that objection response with, well, what's this in regards to? What's this in regards to is actually one of the most common objections. It sounds like a question, but it's really an objection. It's a question that gatekeepers use most and some prospects will use to screen you out. And what they're trying to screen you for is, are you calling for something legitimate, or are you a product pushing salesperson that's trying to take my time? Because you are a salesperson that you really are trying to sell something. So if you honestly answer what is it in regards to, you might say, well, I'm calling to introduce myself. I'm calling to introduce the company I work for. I'm calling to learn more about your needs. I'm calling to see what you're using today. I'm calling to schedule an appointment. I'm calling to see if you need what I sell. I'm calling to talk to you about what I sell. That's what your call is in regards to. The problem with saying anything that's close to any of those is that that's going to give the prospect, or more specifically the gatekeeper, exactly what they're looking for, which is a confirmation that you are a salesperson that's trying to sell something. And then at that point, they'll give you another objection, which might look like, we're not interested, we're not making any changes, we don't have any budget, we're doing okay, and then they start to shut you down and get rid of you. So what I want you to do is I want you to respond to this objection simply with your value points. So if someone says, well, what's this in regards to? Well, the purpose for my call is we work with small business owners and we help them to improve the design, traffic, and conversion rates for their website. And you just sit there. Just sit there and let the other person speak next. I'm not going to say that this answer makes the other person say, oh, I've been waiting for your call, or someone like you. It's not that you build a whole bunch of interest and it's going to make everything great thereafter. Not necessarily. What it does do an excellent job of is it doesn't give the person what they're looking for in terms of a confirmation answer. It's almost like a curveball. And it might lead to them asking another question or giving you a different objection, and that's fine. What you've done with this response is you've stayed alive. And now when you get the next question or the next objection, you deal with that. And most likely that's going to be next in the set of objection responses we talk about. And that's just fine. This objection response did its job, kept you alive, kept the conversation going, and so try it out. The next objection is this a sales call? This is basically the exact same thing as what's this in regards to, just a little bit more direct. Is this a sales call? So you can reply to that in the exact same way as the previous one with redirecting to your value points. I'm not interested. So we've already talked about this one a lot, and this one deserves a lot of discussion because it's going to come up a lot. It might be one of the most common ones. So we can respond to this in a few different ways. First, and I've already demonstrated this a little bit, you can deflect back to your pain questions. We're not interested. Oh, I understand. And if I could ask you real quick though, how do you feel about the current design and layout of your website? So again, there I'm deflecting from the fact that they're not interested. They may respond to it with saying, "Hey, it's great. I love it. It's fine. It's fine." That's okay. I can then ask another question, or they may reply with, "It could be better," or "It's great, but it's not a priority." Whatever the case, they're more likely answer my question than say, "I'm not interested" again, and then I can reply to their answer with another question or follow-up or whatnot. I have a whole bunch of different directions I can go based on their answer. And I just want to point out, you could put your disarm and educate language in front of this. So if they say, "I'm not interested," hey, I understand, and I want you to know I'm not calling you today to sell you a website redesign project. More so, I'm just calling to open the dialogue between our two companies and learn a little bit more about what you're doing and share some examples of how we've helped other small business owners to improve their website. But if I could ask you real quick, how do you feel about the current design and layout of your website? So same exact response with a little bit extra disarm and educate language on the front end. Now, we could also reply to "I'm not interested" with your pain points. So they say, "I'm not interested. Hey, I understand." Although when I talk with other small business owners, they often have challenges with that they're not getting enough traffic from organic SEO. Is that something you're concerned about at all? So what I did there is I just shared a pain point, checked in to see if they have that pain point. You could give a couple different pain points. It's up to you. Just send me your information. This is a very popular objection because what this objection does is it can be a way for the prospect to not look like a bad guy. Some prospects and gatekeepers like being the bad guy, but some, they want to be nice. They don't want to ruin your day as a salesperson. So after you've said a couple things, they might say, "Oh, I tell you what, why don't you send me your information and I'll take a look at it." The worst thing you could do is hear that as a potential opportunity and then spend 20 minutes of your valuable time creating the perfect email with all of your details, sending it over where it gets almost instantly deleted by the gatekeeper or prospect, where in that situation they were only saying, "Send me your information," to get off the phone with you. So the worst thing you could do is read that as potential interest and then waste your valuable time. So one thing that you can do is you can deflect to your pain questions in a similar way to what we've done in the other objection responses with something like, let me just time out here. The only difference is the first sentence, which is you can start out with something like, "Hey, yeah, I can certainly do that. So that I know what best to send over to you, can I ask you real quick, how well is your website doing in terms of being found through search engines?" So then I'm going to stop here. All I did there was shared that I can send information, then I deflected to a question. Now I'm not asking that question to put together my information. The goal of that question is that they're going to answer it. And then when they answer it, you follow up with another question. And it's extremely possible that you get away from them ever talking about you sending their information. If you do this correctly, it's not like you're going to have a few exchanges of questions and discussion, and then they're going to go back and say, so are you going to send me your information? Most likely that's not going to happen because they probably were just trying to get off the phone with you anyways. A great scenario is you ask a couple questions and maybe find out something isn't working well, and that gives you a reason to talk more about how you can help and close for an appointment. You could also deflect just send me your information in the exact same way, but instead of to pain questions, you could deflect to your current environment questions building block, which is something like this. Hey, I could certainly do that. So I know what best to send you. Can I ask you real quick, who are you guys using today for making changes on your website? You could also deflect the just send me your information to your sales process. So instead of asking a question, you could just maybe call them out. I mean, you think about it, if they want you to send over information, if you send over a bunch of documents, they would then spend time reading your documents. I mean, if they genuinely are wanting information, it might be easier and more convenient to talk about it than to send over documents. So you could just kind of explain that in a response to say, hey, sure, I definitely can send over some stuff. You know what, actually, there's a lot of information I can send over. I tell you what, if you have some questions about anything in particular, it might be easier and quicker just to have a brief conversation. We could do that over the phone, and do it on another day. I mean, I know sounds like you're busy right now and you're not able to look at this right now. Instead of me sending over documents that you're going to go through on another day, why don't we just get back together on another day? We could do it in a few weeks, and next month I'm not going anywhere. What do you think about that? We already used someone for that. This is definitely an objection that you should be prepared for, because in most situations, what you sell, they're either using something similar today or they've recently purchased what you sell, and that's not a reason to not call, and it's also not a reason to not talk. As we've talked about, your goal is to have a conversation. It's not to get them to buy. If your goal was to call up someone and say, hey, are you making an order today for what I sell? And they say, we're already using someone, that's a valid reason to not have a conversation. You're not doing that. You're just trying to start the dialogue. So you can reply with something like, well, you can deflect back to your current environment questions. So you can say something like, oh, great. Who are you guys currently using? Then they answer that, oh, how long have you been with them? How's everything going? What are some things you like? What are some things you don't like? So you can certainly ask any of your current environment questions. You could also put your disarm and educate language in front of that to say something like, oh, great. Hey, listen, and I want you to know I'm not calling you today to get you to switch over, especially if things are working okay. I don't want to make any big changes. I don't even know if we're a good fit for you guys. If I could ask you real quick, though, who are you guys currently using? So that's this exact same language, objection response with a little bit of the disarm and educate language on the front end. You can also reply to this objection by deflecting to your pain questions. It's exactly the same as the current environment questions, just you're asking different questions. So, oh, great. If I could ask you real quick, how do you feel about the current design and layout of your website? You could also deflect to your pain points. So, hey, I understand, but when I talk with other businesses, they often have challenges with that it can be difficult to get their website to generate enough leads to support the sales growth. Is that something you've ever been concerned about? The next objection is we don't have any budget or money to spend. And as I mentioned, if you're trying to sell them today, this is an extremely valid reason for them to get rid of you. But you're not trying to sell something today. You're just trying to schedule a meeting, start a conversation. So you could simply reply to this with, this is a deflection to the sales process. It includes some of the disarm and educate language. But hey, I understand, and I want you to know I'm not reaching out to you today to try to sign you up or sell you anything. More so, we're just looking to open the dialogue between our two companies, have an initial conversation. We'd like to learn a little bit more about you and possibly share some information about us. That way, when you begin your budget planning or when your budget opens back up, you can know who we are and how we can help. Are you open to having a brief conversation at some point? It doesn't have to be this week or next. We're not going anywhere. A lot there. You can take out what you don't like. Another thing regarding the we don't have budget right now objection is that that's also not a valid objection, because when they do have budget, it's often too late for you to talk to them, right? So if you have something to sell, you want to talk to them before their budget opens up. So it almost is more logical for you to talk in advance of them having budget, especially when they do their budget planning. If you can help them in some way, and if they do reach a decision where they want your help and need to purchase what you sell, they're going to need to know about you before you do your budget planning. So the key sentence I want you to keep in mind here is the second sentence in the second paragraph, which is that way when you begin your budget planning, or when your budget opens back up, you can know who we are and how we can help. So you're kind of laying out the case for, I understand you don't have budget. I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm just trying to talk. And the reason why I'm trying to talk is because we need to talk now, so that when you do have budget, we've already talked. We've already spoken. So you can also reply to this with your pain questions deflection. So they say, we don't have budget right now. Hey, I understand. If I could ask you real quick, how well is your website doing with being found through search engines? You could also reply to this objection with deflecting to your pain points. Hey, I understand. When I talk with other restaurant owners, they often have challenges with that they're not getting enough website leads through their website. How concerned are you about that? Moving on to the next objection, we're not looking at making any changes right now. This is fairly similar to the we don't have budget right now, so they're kind of delaying, saying it's not the right time. You can reply to this in the exact same way. So you can deflect to your pain questions. Hey, I understand. If I could ask you real quick, how important is it for you to get more leads through your website? You can deflect to your pain points. Hey, I understand. When I talk with other plumbers, they often have challenges with that their website conversion rate it could be better. Are you ever concerned about that? And you can also deflect to the sales process in a similar way that you deflect to the budget objection. This is the language is a little different, because you don't need to mention when your budget opens back up. Basically, the second paragraph is different. So just to go through this real quickly, they say, we're not looking at making any changes right now. Hey, I understand, and I want you to know I'm not reaching out to you to try to sign you up or make any big changes today. More so, we're just looking at opening the dialogue between our two companies and have an initial conversation. We really would like to learn a little bit more about you, possibly share some information about us if it makes more sense. That way, when you're ready to look closer at this, you can know who we are and how we can help. Are you open to a brief conversation at some point? The difference in this objection response is, again, that second sentence in the second paragraph, which it says that way when you're ready to look closer at this. So just kind of addressing, they're saying, we're not looking to make any changes. Let's have a conversation, learn about you, learn about us. That way, when you are looking to make a change, you can know what your options are, is basically what you're trying to say. Because they're telling you, we're not looking at this right now. So that's fine. Call me back in X months. So call me back in 6 months. A lot of times when you get this objection, what the prospect is often saying is, I'm not ready to buy today. Call me back in 6 months. That might be a better time for me to be closer at looking at buying what you sell. Well, remember, you're not looking to sell your product. You're looking to sell the meeting. So this is the exact same as some of the previous ones, but it's actually the exact same response as we're not looking to make any changes right now. So I can certainly do that, but I want you to know I'm not reaching out to try to sign you up or sell you anything. More so, we're just looking to open the dialogue between our two companies, have an initial conversation. We'd like to learn a little bit more about you, possibly share some information about us. That way, when you're ready to look closer at this, you can know who we are and how we can help. Are you open to having a brief conversation? You can also reply to this by deflecting to pain points. So if they're kicking the can down the road saying, let's talk in 6 months, one thing to build your case around in terms of trying to sell the meeting and talking now is to focus on pain, right? Is the pain so much that it might make sense to talk sooner than that, or is the pain at a modest level, minimal, to where it doesn't make they're okay waiting? So the way to do that is to say, hey, I can certainly do that. When I talk with other fast food restaurants, they often have challenges with that they're not getting enough traffic through their website. Is that something you're concerned about at all? And then I'm going to pause here. What you're doing here is you've given them some pain and seeing if they have any of that pain. And if they do, then you want to validate, is 6 months an okay time before you start to look at that, or is that something you should talk? We help with that. So is that something you should look at sooner rather than later? Now, what you could also do is you could modify this response here with the deflecting to the pain points. Sometimes the call me back in X months comes up after you've already spoken to them when you're like following up. So you call to check back in and they say, oh, hey, try us in 6 months and that might be a better time to meet. And so what you could do is you could say, let's say you've already met with them and spoken to them and you know that they have certain pain points or challenges. And so when they say call me back in 6 months, you could modify this approach to say, I can certainly do that. When we spoke last time, you mentioned that you're not getting enough or any traffic through search engines. Is that concern not important enough to where you don't need to deal with that for another 6 months? Or is that enough of a concern that we should maybe not wait 6 months to talk? So same response here, you're just modifying it to make it more customer specific. All right, so we basically just went through almost 20 different objection responses. And when you see all that and you hear all that, you may think, well, geez, that's a lot to remember. And on top of that, we've also probably at this point have helped you to organize a call script, which also has a few different sections of stuff that you need to memorize or keep it fresh in your mind. And that might maybe begin to feel overwhelming or like a lot. But the good thing here is that really all of those responses that we just went through, they're actually just part of your call script. We're not giving you anything new to remember or to work through. All you're actually doing is deflecting when you face an objection back to different areas of your call script. Let me show you. So when you introduce yourself and they say, I'm not busy, or when they say, what's this in regards to, or is this a sales call? You deflect back to your value statement, value points, value proposition, which, by the way, is where you were going to go anyways. You're deflecting, but you're actually just going to the same place you were going anyways. If they did not say, what's this in regards to, the next thing you were going to say was, well, the reason why I'm reaching out is we work with small business owners and help them to get more leads through their website. So that's the exact same thing you would say if they say, what's this in regards to? So nothing really actually, not only nothing new to learn and to keep in mind, not even really a new direction to go in reality once you understand sort of the logic there. You also can maybe ask, you might ask a question or two and you might face oh, we're not interested, or in the middle of your call script you face an objection. You can always redirect back to your pain points or redirect. Every time I said deflect to your pain questions or current environment questions, those are the center point of your script. So anytime you're deflecting back to asking a question, you're just going back to the main part of your script that you want to talk to them about. And a lot of objections come up at the close. So when you're trying to close for the appointment or the meeting which should be the goal of your call script and the goal of your call, a lot of times you're going to get objections like, oh, we're not interested, just send me your info, we don't have any budget right now. And I just went through all of those responses. All of those responses are part of the script. The only ones that aren't part of the script are the deflect to the sales process. So those technically are additional things for you to kind of keep fresh in your mind. But anytime you're redirecting to your value points, pain questions, current environment questions, pain points, you're just deflecting back to the script. So it's nothing new for you to even remember or even additional for you to say. One tool that you can create and make to help you with responding to objections is to create a tool that I call an objections map. And it's real simple. It's 2 columns. One column on the left is the objections that you can anticipate. Probably you should put on your objections map most of the objections we outlined today. Add a few that are specific to you. On the right side are the responses and points you should make when those objections come up. Once you have this objections map, print it out, leave it on your desk, stick it on your wall. there's a few different ways to use the objections map. So first of all, it's something you should look at and be familiar with before you do your prospecting. So this is not a tool that you don't look at. Then when you face the objection for the first time, you're looking at the objections map to figure out what to say. That's not how this works. This is a reminder guide. You need to be familiar with these objections and familiar with the responses, kind of like the armband on a football quarterback. A football quarterback will often have an armband with notes in terms of the plays he's going to run. He doesn't look at that for the first time when he's in the middle of a game. He looks at it as a reminder as to which plays he could potentially do, and then he runs the play from his knowledge and practice and memory. That's how you use this. Now, you can look at the objections map, like I said, before you're making calls to become refreshed with what you can anticipate, then put it down and make your calls. You could glance at it during calls as a reminder. The other way that might be overlooked is I recommend you look and review your objections map sometimes after you make a call. So you can, when an objection ended your call or impacted your call, the call ends, take a look at your objections map. See if it was on there. See if you replied in the same way that the map was telling you to. If you did, then think about how it went. If you didn't, either remind yourself, oh, I need to try this objections map response next time. As part of that sort of looking at your objections map after calls end, I do also recommend a best practice of reflect back in order to improve how you operate moving forward. So when the call ends, reflect back on the call, think about what objections came up and what the objections that prospect had. Try to think about how you replied and how you responded, and then how effective that was at either keeping the call going or getting around the objection. Was there a response you could have said that maybe could have kept the call going or could have been better? Were there questions you could ask that you didn't that might have either kept the call going or got better, extracted information? And then as part of this is a good time to update your objections map when you're doing this reflection. If the objection that you're reflecting on is not on your objections map, add it. This is a good time to add it so that you can be prepared for it next time. If the objections you faced are on the objections map and you're thinking about how you replied, use that as an opportunity to update the responses. You know, if you use the response and it didn't work real well, then try to update it and try something new next time and make the change to that actual document. This way your objections map can continue to evolve and become a more powerful and valuable sales tool for you. So that's pretty much it. Just a few key takeaways. Remember, do everything you can to avoid sounding like a salesperson that's trying to sell something. This will, not only does this help you with responding to objections, it will decrease the number of objections that you face. Remember, with how you reply to the objection, you're not trying to sell the product, you're trying to sell the meeting. And because you're trying to sell the meeting most of the time, deflecting the objection instead of trying to overcome can often be a more successful path. And you can greatly improve your performance, your ability to generate leads, create conversations, sell more by responding to objections better, and you can improve your ability to deal with objections by improving your level of preparation with having an objections map and whatnot.